On this week's Farrell Sports Business podcast, we're going to go look inside the life of an executive recruiter who specializes in the sports business. If you like this podcast, please give it a like, please give it a comment. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. Plenty of other topics that we cover. This one is a fascinating one where so many people want to work in sports. Some people even want to transition from non-sports jobs into sports. And we're going to look at what the needs are and what the job is of an executive recruiter. What trends is he seeing? What is happening in the space? What types of jobs are being created in sports? And how, as a job seeker, can you work collaboratively with someone who's an executive recruiter? So, long-time relationship with one of the senior partners at Elevate Talent, who started his own business early and eventually sold his business in executive recruiting. Now he's with Elevate Talent, Jeff Yocom. Jeff, welcome to the podcast. Really appreciate you joining.
Matt, very good to see you, my friend. Thanks for having me.
So let's start. We're going to talk about what life is like as an executive recruiter, especially in the sports business, but really just a peek inside what your life is like. But I'd like to start with just a little bit about you. Can you talk about your background, and then we'll get into Elevate and what your role is there?
Sure. Yeah, would love to tell you a short version of a longer story. I am in the Pacific Northwest. I ended up at Arizona State with no concept that I could ever work in sports, Matt. I mean, I went down there. I didn't know about Ohio U or even Oregon's programs now, UMass, all the programs that have popped up since I became a professional. Didn't know there was really an opportunity. And so I ended up getting into management consulting, hospitality consulting for a period of time, 3 years of kind of global travel, doing some interesting things. I don't know anybody in my world that went to school to become a headhunter or a recruiter. There's not a major for that as far as I can tell. Maybe I should, create a cottage industry there. But at the end of the day, I tripped into recruiting when the company that I worked for out of college went out of business or was starting to kind of hemorrhage. I needed a more stable, secure kind of career. Found a job in recruiting that I didn't really think was going to last. And I did that for 6 years, accounting and finance, which I'm definitely not going to bore you with. But I got great training, blocking and tackling of recruiting, which there is that in every business, and found my way, luckily, into sports because I was reading the book of lists, and then one of the fastest growing companies in my state was a company that was in sports training, and part of their business was recruiting. And so that was more than 20 years ago. So I would consider myself a long-term veteran in this industry. I've seen a lot of changes. I've grown relationships and clientele over the last 20 years, part in my own company that I started, Marquee Search. I started out with GameFace, which was the company that I found early on. But after, a really good run on my own with a small team, we got acquired by a London-based company, SRI. And since then, we've been acquired by Elevate, which is now I'm happily owned by a North American company now. So it's been a long trip to, I guess, get to a point where I know what I want to do when I grow up, and it's fun to be able to serve kind of the needs of the industry through the lens of infrastructure and talent.
So we were talking a little bit off camera before we started about Elevate Talent. That is joining a company that has a lot of maybe more resources than you've typically had in the past. As a company, it seems to put a lot more clubs in the bag for you. And how does that impact you? And maybe talk about Elevate a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I now have an array of partners, an array of professionals around me that support the industry above and beyond infrastructure. And so while Elevate Talent serves the industry through the lens of a talent advisory and a traditional executive search firm, we're surrounded by a data group that has great, deep insights into the industry, surrounded by a creative talent team that creatively are doing things with NFL stadiums in terms of the work that they can do to create new experiences for our clients to monetize. We have an experiences group that I'll be at the US Open for the first time. The experiences group does quite a bit of work with the US Open and a variety of other really large global events. And so at the end of the day, we've got this group of professionals across various specialties within sports and entertainment that I can now pull on for the benefits of my client. If they have a specific need that isn't really talent or infrastructure related, that could be around succession planning, that could be around a new arena, a new venue. I now don't have to refer those to people outside my own network. I can provide that information and those relationships by way of Elevate and the group that we've assimilated here.
I want to go back to one of your comments before of, okay, maybe there's not a natural course or a track for executive recruiting in college or master's programs. But if you were going to look back, I'm sure you get asked this more now than you did maybe even 10 years ago. What are the skill sets you would look for if somebody who wants to go into that field?
It's a good question. I think they're similar to other parts of our business in terms of I always look for people with critical thinking skills. I look for, in terms of solving problems, thinking on their feet. I want people, frankly, have good judgment that I can trust, that have, when the chips are down, I'm not available, they're going to have good common sense. And again, that kind of envelops credibility, the ability to work with an organization and bring this kind of expertise, and knowledge base, and be able to share that in I'd add, by saying this, the communication skills. So verbal communication skills, written communication skills for top CFOs in the business, for top operators, for top technical people. If they don't have good communication skills, their careers will be limited, right? So to me, it's a function of all of those kinds of things. And then when you're hiring in certain areas, then it's more about the hard skills and things that they've actually done. Again, we just placed a legal counsel, that's not something that I do, but I certainly know how, and my team can recruit for that. That's an area that has, additional experience that you're going to need, additional education, finance as well, IT, those certain areas. But when you're talking about revenue, talking about commercial roles, then it often is looking at scoreboards, and it's looking at what's your history, what's the past performance look like, because that's going to be the best predictor of future success. So that's the kind of things I look at, and then I contextualize it based on, is it I'm looking for another recruiter, or am I looking for someone for my client?
Yeah. So maybe executive recruiting generally in the sports industry, do you find it has a starting point that it tends to be director and above? Where does it generally kick in?
Good question. I'd say that we are typically C-suite -1, maybe -2. So that's
Okay.
typically like vice president and above for our clientele. There are other recruiters that do, managers or directors. I think it gets to be a bit tricky. And I think about this from the candidate perspective, because when I was young and up and coming and growing, I wouldn't really know how to interact with a recruiter, not an internal recruiter, but someone in executive search. I remember I had a couple conversations with people long ago when I was introduced, and it just, I didn't really understand what they were serving in terms of what their job was, right? So I think that the more junior talent may need a little more seasoning and experience before they start having those conversations with recruiters, pending, the introductions they've gotten, or even the outreach. Maybe they did. If they're rising talent, they probably do get outreach from someone that's paying attention to them. So for us, it's typically VP level and above, but there are probably others that do serve that, manager, director level. Yeah.
So let's say new client signed this afternoon. Just general walk through what a process would look like. What is it? 2 months? Is it 3 months? And what would your steps be?
Yeah, I don't want to bore you too much, but I would tell you that we have more rigor than less. So when we get into a process at the beginning, I've got a couple of new searches I'm working on. We will share a timeline with a client and suggest, how do you feel about, generally it's a 12-week timeline. They might ask us to do better than that and say, hey, we'd really like this to be in 8 weeks. We've certainly done 6 and 8 weeks. It's the trade-offs. Like, what do you trade off for that? There are searches that go on longer because your client, requests something else or changes the mandate to some degree. So 12 weeks is normal. And those deliverables from a search firm, typically, in our case, heavy research on the beginning part of the search. We're making sure that the brief is ready for prime time. And by that, I mean that we're ready to send out a candidate brief that really has some sizzle to it. Because if you're recruiting a talent, you really need to ensure that the brief tells the story that you're telling as a recruiter. Because if it falls flat, they go, hey, Jeff, you told me a great story about this job, but it doesn't really line up with the job spec. You know what I mean? So the consistency of marketing materials was, I mean, you're a marketing guy and you recognize the importance of that. So that's the front end of the work that we're doing. And then our job is the really early part to build the right pipeline and get to a short list for our client that has the right number of diverse profiles for our client, of candidates that have the skill set, that are interested, that fit into the money, that fit into the comp, so that's a big part of our job. And we're providing feedback for our clientele really that entire time by way of technology, a portal into our work, but also progress reports. I've had 3 client calls today where I was reporting the progress of our search. I have a team around me and I can let them know this is where we stand. Some of those are close to the finish line. We're close to an offer. Others are just starting. But I would say we're very process driven to get to the kind of results that you need, because it's not just let's throw some names in the air, make a couple phone calls and here's your 3 people. That doesn't work in my world.
So we worked together when I was at USA Swimming. You helped conduct the search for a few positions at the time, and this to me falls into a little bit of the maybe subjective side of your business, or maybe the softer skill is a better way to say it, where maybe you didn't need to know USA Swimming in and out or your client in and out, but you had to have a real good feel for the type of person they're looking for, the culture that would be a good fit. That seems like to be a real skill in itself of, yes, there's the job spec and the comp and location and all that, but there's a more nuanced side of it, I would think.
I don't look like a swimmer to you, Matt. I mean, don't. I'm kidding.
You could pull it off, actually.
Well, what I did is I listened to you. I mean, that's the reality of what we do. The beginning of the process, I probably should have talked about more of our intake process, so we know exactly. Thank you for kind of leading me back to the conversations that we initially had, because you were essentially, hey, are you right for this search? Because we didn't know each other. We knew each other through social media. And I remember our conversations about, is this a search that you should take on? And there was a trust that was being built as we got to know each other. And it was, yeah, we can do this. And it was because you told the great story. You're a marketing guy. You have the art of storytelling. And you narrated, like, here's the moment in time that we're at as USA Swimming. And this is why this role is so important to us. And so you built like the narrative brief for us. And that's something that we do regularly with our clients, is spend a lot of time on the front end to ensure that we know exactly what they need and what they don't need. Because when you start pressure testing candidates and we do that, we'll start talking about candidates. We'll say, this person, here's their personality. How's that going to land in this job? And it could be a brand new job. It could be a legacy job where they're taking over for someone. We always want to know as much information as our client can give us about what has worked in the past, what hasn't worked, what are their problems of today. And so, you can find the right skill set, but if you don't have the right personality and culture fit, the other side of the coin, it's going to fall down 90% of the time.
And then just on the far other end of it, you may help the company negotiate a compensation package. They may do that themselves. It's really A to Z.
We should be there doing that, quite honestly. And I let my clients know. We had one last week that wanted to make the offer themselves. That's fine, as long as we don't let them walk into a trap or walk into a tenuous situation. So we are soup to nuts from real cradle to grave, from the beginning of the search to the end, because we've built a relationship with a candidate. And if a candidate's got a few things that are going to ask for, it's nice to be able to manage that from our perspective, and frankly, kind of insulate the candidate and our client from tough conversations, those tough negotiations. We can do that, and then we congratulate them on their new employee and a new employer. That's fun. That's a little bit of that's when it goes as smoothly as it should, and that's not always the case, because we deal in the business of human beings. And that's not
Hmm.
really a business, but you have personalities and you've got to manage the communications that you're getting from your candidate and your client. So there's only going to be one. I mean, Matt, the reality is there's one person that gets the job, right?
Hmm.
And what you want to have is three or four they could probably offer the job to. You want to be clear in your communication with a candidate and not, lead them astray. But you also can't let them sit there for 2 weeks and there's spoilage of like, well, what's going on? I haven't heard from anybody. People are smart. They read the writing on the wall, right? They understand that
Yeah.
maybe they're not the top candidate. And so it's our job to make sure that we're there with them. We're letting them know as much information as we possibly can. And if they're the top candidate, we're doing our best to get them to the finish line sooner than later. Because if we do have to pivot for whatever reason, you don't want to pivot to somebody who's already left the building.
Yeah. So I want to go back to like the companies that you founded, like GameFace and even Marquee. So for simple math, let's call it 10 years ago, of trends that you see, maybe a couple different directions to this. First, I want to ask you the types of jobs that you're seeing now that you didn't see then. And then separately, anything maybe about the process that's really different now than it was then of how a candidate comes into the fold.
Yeah, I didn't found GameFace. I'll give that credit to Rob Cornelis, but I will
Got
say
it.
things look so much different now than 20 years ago, as anyone that's been in the business long can appreciate. And I'd say that 5 or 10 years ago, you were looking at the highest level CRM or data or BI person in an organization might have been like, oh, it's a manager or director reporting into a chief of staff that probably wasn't even around, a finance person. Now you have chief strategy officers, you have BI departments, right? You have information and data that is rich. As a marketer, you know the value of this data. And so there's some data smog out there too. There's so much of it. But how do you interpret it? How do you use data to be smarter? And we're talking really about teams at the moment, but you talk about brands, you talk about
Hmm.
organizations that want to increase their sponsorship portfolio. All of them want more and more information, not less, to make good decisions. So I'd say that function area has grown dramatically. I would tell you that the infusion of private equity, and there's news even today about the NFL, the infusion of private equity into the business, good or bad, is not going away. It's not going to stop. It's come in more. Our Elevate has private equity investors as well, and so to that end, the expectations have gotten higher for everyone. Anytime PE is involved, there's less of a running a business as your hobby. You might have an owner. There's still a handful of owners like that, but a lot of those owners have been able to sell to other organizations, or you've got publicly traded companies, or you have private equity, and that means that the expectations of running the business have gone up. And so while you can't win on the field, you don't always control that. You can control the front office, you can control the people in, and that means there's been a flow of people from outside of sport, from technology, from best in class kinds of employers into the sports industry. That doesn't always work. There's plenty of stories that you've seen CMOs and you've seen other people, presidents imported from another industry, and then they leave within a year or two, and you kind of go, oh, that probably didn't take. It doesn't sound like. And there's always a reason for it or a story, but the end result is you now look outside of sport, because if I would have given you advice 10 years ago as someone trying to get in sports from another industry, say probably not going to happen. In most cases, it might have happened in finance or legal again or something. But in most cases, like, well, you didn't start in sports, you're not going to be in sports. That's a completely different conversation these days.
In- Interesting. Because I've always been, it's like sports can be insular, and the sports can be insular. The Olympics can be even more insular. College athletics, those silos. But anything, and I don't mean this in a good or bad way, anything different about candidates from 10 years ago to today? Expectations different? Anything has changed from the candidate perspective that you
Yeah.
see?
From my seat, I don't see the long, long line that used to be waiting outside the door for jobs, in ticket sales to jumpstart your career in sports. I mean, the Game Face Academy, I worked there, 2002 to 2013. I was leading a search division within a company that helped people get their first job in sports. And now a number of those people are now presidents of
Hmm.
teams that are running really big operations. And by the way, they started in ticket sales. I don't know that that business exists today. I don't, in terms of an organization that can, develop entry level talent to take their first job in sports. I say that because I've got daughters that are in the working world now that they like sports, but they like other things too. And at the end of the day, when you see the packages you get from tech companies and the benefits that you get, and the hours are a little more normal, and you have your nights and weekends, sports isn't the end all be all anymore. I love the industry and I would never want to work anywhere else, I don't think. At the end of the day, this industry for young people, I think lands differently. And part of it's clearly consumption. I mean, you probably could talk to a lot smarter people than me about this, but I'm a dad of kids that don't necessarily have cable. My wife is like, "Why do you have cable TV anymore?" Sports, I mean, I don't have to, but I'm an old dog and I like my cable TV. But that's not normal these days, especially for up and coming professionals. And so I worry a little bit about the existential crisis of where the talent comes from in the future to fill some of those jobs that are, really the blocking and tackling that make these organizations successful. So that's a big sea change, don't you think?
I completely agree. Do you think was the COVID period any type of a catalyst? Because that work from home became that was jet fuel to work from home and remote work. Was COVID a significant changer in the sports industry?
It was, I mean, again, I don't want to be too esoteric or autobiographical, I guess, to me, but people moving for jobs in our industry now, we'll simply have people that say, I'm happy to listen to that opportunity, but I'm not going to move. I'm very comfortable where I am. I've realized post-pandemic, I don't have to, relocate for a job. And so we've had a harder time moving people to markets that in the past were attractive, quite honestly. And that's really more property driven, the sports teams where you really can't do the job remotely anymore. We've filled a few jobs for clients that had executives that didn't want to come back to the city. And as a result, they had to move on from those people and hire people that were going to be in the office again. So I think if you don't want to work in the office, you don't have to work in the office and you just work in a different part of the business or you find another job. And I think that definitely what the catalyst was, the pandemic and the ways of working, then and what was important to people. And now you've got CEOs and public traded companies that go, we need to build culture. We need to get back to the office. And you got a lot of young professionals that go, well, that's not going to get it done for me. That's not the culture I want to build. See you later.
Yeah. This is more just curiosity. Well, first of all, you teed it up by using the term headhunter because I was going to ask if that's cool, not cool. But any
Totally cool.
misperceptions about your field that you find yourself explaining? I'm like, no, that's not really what my job is.
Yeah, I think that some of it is earned in terms of headhunters. You've got some people that like to play God in my business because their bad behavior was rewarded or they work for a big brand. I can think of a lot of people that have massive egos in my business, and that doesn't interest me. My clients are first, they're the ones in the spotlight. I'm uncomfortable in the spotlight. I'd much rather have my clients there. I love to be impactful. I love to have influence in the industry and give good advice and guidance to candidates and clients. But I think, if you're talking about headhunters, it's not a pejorative. It might have been, at some point, but I think that there's some bad behavior of ghosting candidates, of
Yeah.
not communicating clearly. And I'm far from perfect, but I do my best to ensure that I pick up the phone and I call someone, let them know what's going on, give them feedback as best I can, to the degree that a client will kind of want us to give that kind of feedback. But I think that the nature of the headhunter relationship, some candidates think, oh, you're working for me. At the end of the day, I try to the client is the person paying us, which is our client or the organization hiring. At the end of the day, though, that candidate experience is really important. And I hear horror stories all the time about a candidate experience, which, by the way, doesn't reflect only poorly on the recruiter. It reflects poorly on the company that hired that recruiter. And so that's my North Star is like, I don't want to my clients look bad. If my clients look bad, I get a phone call or they know like that Jeff Yocom guy's a Yahoo. He sold me a bill of goods or 3 months into the job, he doesn't take my call and and this isn't the job that he told me it was going to be. Again, I'm far from perfect, but I can't sleep at night if I'm not giving somebody some sort of feedback or at least ensuring that I'm doing the best I can to make these kinds of tricky placements happen.
Well, you've been part of a few different evolutions from working at a company to forming your own company to being bought and merging. Where was a great break along the way, and any piece of great advice that you got along the way?
The advice probably was a kick in the butt, Matt. Quite honestly, it was when I remember like 2011, 12, 13. It wasn't a really great time financially coming out of the financial crisis, TARP, and housing crisis then. And my daughters were younger. I've got a young one still, but I had young daughters, and I was making decisions based on being pretty conservative. And I was working for a company again. Game Face and Rob were great to me. I had a really good run, but the business had changed and his focus was different. And as a result of that, I knew that I wanted to double down on executive search and do nothing but that. And I had my friends and clients, my wife, they'd say, why don't you go out on your own? What are you doing? Just go do it yourself. And I'm like, oh, I need to make sure that my employer is taken care of. And like, you just quit worrying about this. And so I had a really good conversation with my company at the time, told them my plan. We had to work out the right arrangement to let it happen. But I'm like, I'm going to be doing this. Let's go. And so started that in 2013. Built a beautiful brand because I had really good people that could help me do that. Was able to hire people like Tyler Nelson and others in my company that really helped us, frankly, be kind of a challenger brand that punched above our weight. So the advice I took was bet on yourself. What are you waiting for? I was really an accidental entrepreneur because I grew up in the 80s with the Michael Douglas Wall Street. Bigger was better, and working in Wall Street was sexy at the time. So I thought big business was the way to go. I never thought I want to own and I hear young people now, I want to own my own company. I want to start my own thing. I never thought that. I was never that way. I was thinking I want to work big business. I want to be a CEO. And once I recognized what I could have in my own company, it all kind of came naturally. But it took a couple clients going, we don't hire the company, we hire you. What do like they smacked me in the head. So I needed that.
Funny, we got there different, the same result, but different paths. And, some professional change was forced on me with pandemic and Golf Channel and, created my own business out of fear. Yours, thankfully, was maybe a little more bust down the locker room doors excited. So that's it. But two different paths, we got to the same place.
There was a lot of fear though, Matt. I mean, you need people around. That's your network. The people that you trust, that you go to when the chips are down, they're amazing because that's, when you're looking in the mirror and you're like, do I have this in me? And your people are telling you no problem. And then you do it and you go, boy, I just needed to bet on myself apparently. So,
Yeah.
Maybe we're like this. There are other people that are serial entrepreneurs that listen to this and think I'm full of crap. And that's because they're serial entrepreneurs. But that wasn't me. That was never kind of how I was built. So I found my way. It took a little while, but I found my way and I'm doing what I should be doing.
Well, Jeff, I appreciate you joining. It's fascinating. I really enjoy hearing about your perspective on the industry and your role and your path. And so, and for those watching on YouTube, know that you can Google Jeff Yocom and Matt Farrell, and there might be a video of me doing your podcast a few years ago.
So you got a different backdrop. I got a pretty good memory about that, but your backdrop,
definitely. This is the office. Work from home was not for me. So
yeah, understood.
Jeff, thank you so much.
I appreciate it, Matt.
Thank you, sir.
All right, take care.
I always appreciate Jeff Yocom. He's just such a pro and always just generous with his time, whether it's working on a search together that we did in our past days, or just generally catching up and keeping track of what's going on in my life and his life. And so I appreciate him. So we do have some other podcasts. If you liked that, there's one recently with Steve Ditmore who talks about what type of an education you might want to pursue to get a job in sports. So that's one of the more recent ones. And then some others back in the back catalog or the vault, if you will, Olympic themed. We talked to Chris Wilson with the CBC in Canada, Jill Gear, the communications and marketing chief for USA Gymnastics, Mel Stewart, who heads up a swimming media site called SwimSwam, and even Marisa Wigglesworth, who is the CEO of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Museum. So hopefully you enjoyed the conversation with Jeff, and feel free to check out some of the back catalog of interviews as well. Like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube.